Colleges and universities throughout the United States have, with varied enthusiasm, claimed a growing appreciation for the nation's rapidly changing racial demographics. The Pew Research Center predicts that by 2050, whites will become a minority at only 47% of the total U.S. population. People of color combined will outnumber whites, Latinos, African Americans, and Asian Americans at 29, 13, and 9% respectively. The call to better serve historically underrepresented communities and prepare dominant students to enter an increasingly diverse workforce led to the creation of several University Chief Diversity Officers, or CDOs, with varying levels of authority, funding, upper-level support, and campus commitment. Their job to ensure that the university is doing everything possible to be prepared for the coming browning of America, attract a more diverse faculty, staff, and student body, respond to the needs of the surrounding communities of color, create initiatives to improve the campus climate, and help the university look good on all diversity issues. Chief Diversity Officers are charged with ensuring that women of all races, but usually practiced and embodied as signifying white women exclusively, people of color, gays and lesbians, and the differently abled, those practicing non-dominant religions, individuals over 40 years of age, and veterans are welcome, celebrated, supported, and successful. Working with various offices across campus and often within the surrounding communities, these leaders ensure that campus initiatives, policies, practices, celebrations, recruitment, and retention efforts recognize multiple ways of knowing and being. These diversity gurus are to be all-knowing, thoughtful, unthreatening, and often spend their days putting out fires started by university leaders, be they students, staff, administrators, or faculty, that are detrimental to the university's reputation and the success of marginalized university students, staff, and faculty members. Further, while many of these chief diversity officers report to the highest level of university administration, the president or the senior academic vice president or provost, too often their staff and budgets are the smallest of all the offices reporting to top leaders. Many of these positions and offices come as a result of a major incident on campus. Disgruntled students of color outraged by the treatment of a student, the denial of tenure for a beloved professor, a racist commentary in the student newspaper, racial profiling by campus police, lack of culturally relevant coursework, or the absence of faculty of color initiate a protest on campus. Some take over the president's office, refusing to leave until their concerns are heard. Others march, hold vigils, and generate petitions which attract media attention. In an effort to appease student demands and shift television and newspaper attention away from the negative, presidents quickly introduced the idea of hiring a chief diversity officer who will make everything better. At other times, the idea of finding that person who best understands these issues comes after a series of meetings of a university committee at the President's Commission on Diversity. Often charged with advising the university president on related issues, these committees usually recommend the hiring of a chief diversity officer at a high level in the university administration who will be empowered by the president and/or senior academic officer to hold the university accountable. The vision and expectation of these officers is one of unifying a divided campus, rallying everyone around the idea that diversity will save them, make them better scholars, teachers, and workers. In theory, the idea sounds wonderful to many members of the campus community. After all, who would ever publicly say that they do not value embracing the richness diversity brings to the institution? In the abstract, the idea is great, and the introduction of the right person for the job is met with high expectations and anticipation. Everything will be better now. The new person will take care of these issues, and no one else will have to be worried about the problems that led to the need to create the Chief Diversity Officer position. However, if the Chief Diversity Officer achieves any success, no matter how small, campus members take notice. All of a sudden, there are women in the medical school that 5 years earlier had very few. Or there are students of color in an assortment of spaces asking questions about long-standing policies and practices while expecting to be greeted with the same enthusiasm and interest as their white counterparts. Faculty of color begin to teach courses on race and class while pursuing and publishing research in journals with which their white colleagues are unfamiliar. Before long, the appearance of new faces and bodies which are not white, male, Christian, heterosexual, or able-bodied creates some confusion and conflict, almost a sense of buyer's remorse. That feeling that comes shortly after making a major investment in something that says, maybe we've made a mistake, or we may have moved too quickly, or we didn't give this investment enough thought before acting. The result can be a slowing down of programs and initiatives designed to increase the presence and success of marginalized students, staff, and faculty. One Chief Diversity Officer noted, "It's as if they brought me here to help make the university more diverse by bringing in students and faculty of color, and are surprised when I actually do what they hired me to do." So when there is an influx, even a small influx of Black or Latino students, my white colleagues begin wondering, where did they come from? Or how did they get here? Many diversity leaders find themselves on campuses where the idea of diversity is better and more appealing than the actuality of diversity. In the abstract, diversifying the professorate, administration, staff, and student body is sexy, righteous, and just. But the reality may not live up to expectations. Some campus members lose sight of the fact that one of the outcomes of inviting different people to the table is that they bring with them different ways of knowing and being that may be quite unlike that of their white counterparts. In a presentation I made during the 2012 National Conference on Race and Ethnicity in Higher Education, I suggested that many people of color work on campuses that claim to want our presence and ideas, but failed to show us the fine print in the advertisement that attracted us. And that advertisement read, "Bring your diversity of thought and ways of knowing and being as long as they are just like our thoughts and ways of knowing and being." Although we really think we believe in equality and equity, we only really mean that in the abstract. In fact, we have yet to really think through what it would mean, let alone look like, if you actually show up on our campus in your Black and brown bodies with ideas that contradict our well-established white ideas, practices, and traditions. We just thought it would be fun to have one or two of you around. Superficial support for the idea of diversifying the student body, faculty, administration, and staff cannot accommodate and does not anticipate difference of opinion, perspective, lifestyle, need, or experience. Nor does it acknowledge the systemic white supremacy so deeply ingrained in institutions, enabling everyday racist practices to go unnoticed until they are pointed out by a new member of the community or the Chief Diversity Officer. Consequently, the very people who once championed the creation of this new office that would attract new people to the campus are no longer certain the university is moving in the right direction. When forced to see their own complicity in the mistreatment of others, for example, different rules for tenure for women than for men, or for whites than for people of color, or the decision making and mentoring that takes place over lunches where historically underrepresented faculty and staff are absent. Some whites feel embarrassed, defensive, angry, and hurt that anyone would ever suggest that she or he is biased in any way. There is no way to have a productive conversation when one party, especially the party with all or most of the power, is dealing with these emotions. Unfortunately, the person who forces them to think about what can be interpreted as biased behavior becomes the problem. She or he may be seen as rude, attacking, threatening, and overly emotional, when in reality, she or he is only doing the job the university leadership thought it wanted. So, to paint a picture of what many CDOs experience, I offer 4 narratives from CDOs in the United States about their experiences on predominantly white campuses. They are offered to illumine the challenges associated with changing systems and cultures that are resistant to that change. The first is from Carlos, and he says, I had already decided to leave the university after fighting every day for 5 years to do the work I was hired to do, as I sat in our weekly university leadership meeting. We were one of the few campuses that still used American Indian imagery for our sports teams. Each year, local members of the American Indian community complained about our use of an American Indian tribal name and cultural symbols. American Indian faculty, staff, and students complained to central administration and to the local press. However, a small band of Indians completely supported the use of their name, even though the university never offered any form of compensation, no commitment for scholarships, or faculty or staff hires. Anyway, during one of our cabinet meetings, one of the other vice presidents, a white male, actually said, I don't know why they, the Indian tribe, are so upset. They should be thanking us. If it weren't for us, nobody would know who they are. We are putting them on the map. I sat there waiting for someone to speak up. There was a look of shock on each face, and silence fell over the room. But nobody, not one white person, uttered a word. Instead, everyone did what they had been doing for my entire time in that position. They all looked at me, waiting for me to speak up. Well, I didn't say a word. Later, I was told by a friend that her boss, who was in the room, actually said, I can't believe Carlos didn't say anything about that ridiculous comment. Thankfully, my friend asked him, what did you say? With all of the talk coming from my white colleagues about being committed and understanding that one person cannot be held responsible for doing the work of diversity on our campus, when it was necessary to actually say something, they all fell silent. If I didn't speak up or missed a meeting, nothing happened. The next story is Marcia's, and she says, I was hired by a great new president to be the first chief diversity officer at a mid-sized Midwestern university. He had a great vision, and together we launched several new initiatives. But when he left for another university, he took the university's commitment with him. All of a sudden, the people who had attended our diversity events, key administrators, stopped returning my calls, no longer wanted to partner on faculty hiring, and never showed up for scheduled diversity lectures. When the new president came on board, he stopped holding diversity events at the university-owned president's residence. His assistant told us that if he didn't want all of those people in his house, he had no obligation to do so. People on campus and in the community began looking to me for an explanation for the sudden shift in commitment. But there wasn't much I could say in the new president's defense. The university began losing all of the diverse faculty the former president and I had worked so hard to recruit, and the improvement in the recruitment, retention, and graduation rates of students of color faded. My integrity and reputation were on the line, and I couldn't continue. Fortunately, I had a tenured faculty appointment, so I returned to my academic unit. Today, our university has fewer faculty of color than it did when I was hired 15 years ago. Our graduation rate for students of color is embarrassing, and the last chief diversity officer recently announced she was leaving for a more progressive institution. The third narrative is Maxine's, and she says, being the chief diversity officer on my campus was both exciting and terrifying. I worked for a president who made his commitment to diversity clear. It seemed like he was always talking about the importance of diversity in every meeting, whether it was with local business leaders, the state legislature, or in his State of the University talk. He made doing my job much easier than it would have been had he remained silent on the importance of diversity. Imagine my delight when he took note of the lack of women and minorities in one of our professional schools. We should be embarrassed by these numbers, he said both to me and to the dean of the school, and instructed him to take steps to recruit more women and minority students. Over the next few years, those numbers increased significantly, so that professional school began to mirror our peers. Everyone was delighted except our mostly white and conservative legislature. Why are you admitting all of those unqualified women and minorities and keeping our good young men out of your school? They demanded. Soon, our own legal counsel was advising us not to admit too many women and minority students because doing so might impact the funding we get from the legislature. We were told, you can't make the legislature too mad or they will hurt you. I was so proud that the president stood firm throughout the ordeal. But he was on the ladder of success and left the university 1 year later for a presidency at a larger university. His departure meant a return to the status quo. Our numbers for women and minority students in the professional school began to drop as the admissions committee worked to include more white male applicants and exclude everyone else. Although the numbers have not decreased to the levels prior to our surge, they are nowhere near our peers' numbers. And the final narrative belongs to Barbara. She says, I should have known I'd made a mistake in accepting the position in my first weeks when I kept losing emails. Each morning during those first couple of weeks, I would look for the previous day's email, unable to find them. Finally, the technology guy informed me that he had only given me a temporary email address, which is set up to disappear, wiping away all information at the end of each day. In retrospect, I think he was trying to tell me that the work I had been hired to do was unwelcome and that I would one day too disappear. The market failed shortly after I was hired, and I found myself defending every move I made. The university president was distant and often unavailable for our regularly scheduled meetings. When we did meet, we spent time talking about his hobbies, his family concerns, his love for tennis, and how tired he was from working such long hours. Nothing substantive ever came from our meetings. He never remembered any potential problem I called to his attention or carried through on any promise he made to support our office. Further, he told me that he felt uncomfortable speaking publicly about the importance of diversity. As a man of color, he felt that it would look like his support of diversity and me as a CDO, another woman of color, would look like favoritism. Besides, that was why they hired me. That was my job, he explained. I think because he was so absent from the diversity discussion, he empowered those who did not want to see any improvement or change in the campus climate to work against our office. So, when we needed access to student academic records in order to advise students in a grant funded minority retention program, we were told we did not have authority or clearance to receive such sensitive data. When the university imposed a hiring freeze, a committee of key leaders was appointed to hear exceptions to the hiring freeze and grant approval to hire personnel when necessary. No one from the diversity office served on that committee to weigh in on equity issues, and each time our office requested a waiver for the freeze, we were denied at least twice before the committee would finally give in and allow us to begin the search process, even when the position was for a compliance officer to keep us in line with federal policies. Of course, at a total of 8, our staff was the smallest of all the offices reporting to the president. We watched as every other department reporting to the president increased in size during the so-called hiring freeze, and we joked that the freeze only applied to the diversity office. When I wanted to promote a hardworking staff member, I was told by our human resources officer that our university did not allow for such a promotion or have the title I wanted on the books. When I pointed out that similar positions existed on other campuses and that my own title didn't exist 5 years ago, I only received a cold stare. Of course, we all watched as other offices created new titles for the staff members they wanted to promote without issue. In the end, the IT guy was right. I did end up disappearing. Today, I work in an unrelated area because I have finally realized university leaders are only willing to talk about diversity. Very few want to do the heavy lifting for the long haul. One question emerges as we ponder any success realized by CDOs. Can university diversity initiatives be sustained? One question emerges as we ponder any success realized by CDOs. Can university diversity initiatives be sustained? The 4 narratives just shared point to the fragile and frustrating nature of doing diversity on predominantly white campuses and suggest that achieving sustained efforts is challenging. In large part, this is due to the rush to react to conflict with temporary and inadequate band-aids so attention can return to what many view as the real work of the university. The size of both the budgets and staff of diversity offices points to the priority given the work associated with fulfilling the lofty goals identified by planning committees. I was so inspired during a meeting of chief diversity officers to hear a colleague explain that the president of his institution insisted that the diversity budget and staff be comparable to that of the vice presidents for student affairs, athletics, administration, all of the offices that reported to him. There is hope. And there are examples of universities genuinely committed to enhancing diversity. Unfortunately, those examples are few and far apart. What follows are some suggestions for leaders seriously thinking about creating or rebuilding sustainable diversity programs. These ideas are not intended to be exhaustive. Rather, they are offered as a starting point and should be added to or subtracted from to accommodate the unique needs and situations of each institution. More than ever, the magic word in the academy seems to be assessment. Prior to adopting any new initiative, it is imperative to understand where the university stands on an assortment of issues, and diversity is no exception. It is important to know the answers to some key questions. What is the makeup, the racial, gender, ability of the students, the faculty, the staff, the administration, the surrounding communities? What are the projections for the next 20 to 30 years? This information helps university administration determine next steps. Another assessment imperative is to gain a clear understanding of the current campus climate. Although the cost of conducting climate surveys can be expensive, the yield far outweighs the initial investment. Too often, though, leaders are shocked by the results, which almost always show the institution is not viewed as welcoming to women, people of color, gays and lesbians, Muslims, the disabled, etc. I know of one campus whose leaders were so hurt and offended by the results of their first ever campus climate study that they pledged never to conduct a similar audit. Other institutions refuse to conduct climate surveys during capital campaigns out of a fear that there will be negative press coverage impacting donor contributions. The important thing to remember about a campus climate survey is that they rarely suggest that the campus is an idyllic mix of peace, love, and mutual appreciation amongst the races and genders. However, they do offer a starting point, a benchmark, or launching place from which to begin efforts for change. A thorough assessment of the campus climate can shed light on key issues and help to identify both short and long-term goals. Frequently, addressing the short-term needs, what many call low-hanging fruit, quickly presents the university with some quick wins that can tide the university over while it works on longer-term plans. For example, learning that the institution has lost key faculty due to the absence of a partner or spousal hiring program might be addressed with the announcement of a new program shortly after survey completion. Or, faculty of color may express a need for affinity groups, which can be established right away as the university embarks on a lengthy diversity planning process. The response of leadership to the results of climate surveys provides an important insight into the readiness to have serious discussions about diversifying the campus. If presidents and other campus leaders are immediately defensive, this should be seen as a sign that much work needs to be done before moving forward with the hire of a diversity professional, which would only shift the burden of responsibility elsewhere. As the narratives above demonstrate, without buy-in and active and continual public support from the highest levels of administration, little sustained change will occur. No leader wants to hear that the organization for which she or he is responsible is a source of pain for historically marginalized and underrepresented populations. However, a courageous leader accepts that news while being determined to do whatever it takes to change those experiences and perceptions so that each year the climate shows gradual improvement. Defensive responses and those that deny the reality of the experiences reported in climate surveys ensure that the problems identified will continue and grow into bigger, more complex issues. Campus leaders must determine whether the institution is prepared and willing to have serious and prolonged discussions in order to create the necessary change. The best determinant is the commitment of top leaders to both stay with the university until systemic change occurs and key measures are in place to sustain those improvements when different leaders join the university. It is unfair, perhaps even unethical, for university leaders to recruit chief diversity officers only to leave the institution for greener pastures before real and sustainable changes have become part of the university culture. Just as some presidents, deans, and other administrators remain on board until major fundraising goals are met, a leader who truly values and believes in improving the campus climate will stick around until she or he sees sustainable change. Unlike what was demonstrated in the four narratives shared earlier, the university must be a place where the commitment continues regardless of who is at the helm. One example can be found at universities that include diversity accomplishments in the annual reviews of department chairs and deans. Others mandate wording in all job advertisements that goes beyond the obligatory messaging to clearly state that the institution values diversity of thought and expression and is particularly interested in hiring individuals who share in and can contribute to that commitment. In such institutions, all interviews for staff, faculty, and administration include questions about diversity, not to exclude candidates, but to inform every applicant of the institution's values and goals. Some chief diversity officers meet with each tenure track faculty candidate who receives an on-campus interview to reinforce the university's commitment to diversity and to suggest that everyone has a role to play in creating a welcoming and inclusive climate. Still, the point cannot be overstated. The implementation of these practices can easily fade when these practices have not had sufficient time to become part of the university culture, systems, and structures. Just as it has taken decades for an institution to create a hostile environment for marginalized groups, it will take years to turn the tide. A revolving door of leaders will ensure the status quo of marginalization returns when the diversity champion disappears. While it is important to identify a high-ranking university official to occupy the Chief Diversity Officer position, university presidents must commit to sharing the responsibility of communicating the importance of diversity to the present and future success of the institution. Universities that fail to prepare students to engage an increasingly diverse city, nation, and world are doing a disservice to their graduates and society. I am familiar with an institution with one academic unit that failed to produce students skilled in interacting across racial lines to the point where job applications from its graduates were ignored by a major employer in that city. The fault here does not rest with the students, many of whom were resistant to course materials that exposed them to different ways of knowing and being. Rather, the department chair, the faculty, along with the dean, and the national organization that granted accreditation to that unit are responsible for the department's failure to adequately educate and prepare its graduates. Ensuring that students have opportunities to receive a well-rounded education from each academic unit cannot be the responsibility of the Chief Diversity Officer, nor is it her or his responsibility to be the sole voice or champion for diversity on the campus. Campus leaders, white, male, straight, and Christian and able-bodied, must take up the mantle as well. It is shameful that in Carlos's case, most of the people around the table recognized the problematic nature of the remarks made about American Indians, yet expected that, as the lone person of color and CDO, it was his responsibility alone to address the absurd comments made by their colleague. In fact, let's pause again.
Resume. Yeah.
Okay. Campus leaders white and male and straight and Christian and able-bodied, must take up the mantle as well.
Be empowered through the culture and community in the United States to let our voice to be heard. Thank you.
I think students can be empowered mainly by feeling a sense of equality, knowing that your opinion is worth something. A lot of students or people that we work with or consider our peers and whatnot, they feel like their voice isn't heard because their opinion does not matter. Just letting someone know their opinion does matter and it's worth something allows them to say, okay, I have to say so in this, so let me take a stand and make a point of view and develop my own thoughts and proceed forward what I think is right or what I think is wrong. So definitely I would have to say that would empower someone to find their voice.
Alan, do you mind if I follow up? Are there ways that you can think of that would help students feel like their voice matters and their opinion matters? What can you do as faculty, staff, administrators?
I think you guys can pretty much have a good sense of it, but not, I would say not having social classes become a factor, rank, whether this guy is, I mean, a lot of people often get intimidated by someone who, in a classroom setting, there's a guy always answering that question. A teacher has a question, a professor has a question, and the guy answers, and he's always right, it seems like. And those people normally dominate the entire class. So as a peer, you sit in class and you may have the answer, but you don't want to participate because you're like, I don't know. So just by letting the students know that maybe if you may be wrong, it doesn't matter, you're still voicing your opinion and it does mean something. So that I would think that.
Thank you very much, it's very helpful. Priscilla.
I definitely agree with what has been said. I think one of the things I most importantly feel is that listening is imperative. And I think it's opportunities like these, forums like these, that allow the students to be able to voice their concerns and for faculty to be a part of that and to really pay attention and listen. Okay, so there are issues concerning different areas of students' lives that become an issue when you are involved in campus. Also, creating the awareness, I think it's very important, not just among ourselves as students, but as a campus as a whole. So, again, like forums as these that are addressing issues that are very important, but have somewhat been under the water for a while, it's important to bring them to light and to be able to reflect on that and how we can really find the power to allow students to voice their concerns. I think that's it for now.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny being a panelist. I came here thinking that my goal is to educate others about student opinion, but I think after the last session, we've learned a lot from some of the other students, and when I was up here trying to figure out what I said last time, I think it does shift and change, and it goes back to what I had said in the previous one about lenses, and everyone having their own set of lenses that is derived from their experiences. Maybe it's their culture, religious beliefs, political beliefs, even the regions or affiliations that they're a part of. And if we can challenge ourselves to try to see things through the other individuals' lenses, then we're allowing ourselves to create an environment that is open and provide opportunities for students. And I do think that goes with what Ellen had said about in the classroom and ranking as well. If we allow ourselves to view through the lenses of the faculty, of other students, then it does provide students the ability to try to find their own voice and empower them to continue talking. So I do think it starts with the individual and challenging ourselves to try to reach that level of cultural competence when trying to find what it is that makes the individual say the things they say or have the opinion that they do have.
Well, as a faculty member, I like to empower students in the classroom. And so I feel like I'm repeating this to just about most of the people in this room. But when I have taught, I often taught courses on race and gender, class and have said to my students early, and actually we put it on the syllabus too, that we're going to have some difficult conversations, that we're going to talk about some things that might make you feel very uncomfortable, things that you haven't talked about, but we're going to do it, and it's okay to feel uncomfortable. If you stick with it, we'll get to the other side, you'll be more confident, you will be able to think and talk about different issues more critically, and that's the goal of higher education, from my perspective, is to be able to be a critical thinker. And it's okay if I don't agree with you, because in the end, I don't have to, but you need to be able to voice your opinions. And so I think in the classroom is a very, very good way to help students find their voice. So here's one that impacted students of color more than whites, but it impacted white students very horribly as well. Is we had, I won't say which, we had an academic unit, we had a lot of them really, they had way too many students than they could handle. So they made it really hard for you to get in as a major. And that impacted the students of color drastically. It impacted white students too. And so we said to our students, we're going to teach you this other route into that major. And then they were successful in that major. And then they came and said, well, what are you doing? We want the white students to be successful too. Because here's what we learned. What works for students of color works better for white students. What works for women works better for men. Right? What works for the disabled works better for the able-bodied. I have a colleague who talks about, and I hadn't thought about this, but about the doorknob, which when they move away from the doorknob to that sort of long thing, that's better for all of us. Right? Yeah, and that was done for the disabled, but my goodness, I'm glad that we have doors like that. So we looked at those structures. We also looked at the courses that our students were in, and we said, we are going to keep you out of those crazy faculty members. We all know who they were. You're not taking that class from that crazy faculty member. I don't care if you want it, you're not. We're going to wait till somebody else is teaching it. So we figure out where are those gatekeepers and how do we get around those gatekeepers. And eventually what happened when at the end of 4 years on a campus where folks were graduating at 6 and our students of color were graduating at 4, and not only were they graduating at 4, they were going to graduate school, they came and said, tell us what you're doing with those kids, because we want to do that. Right? Well, why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you? Why? And so I think that there are structures that are in place that hurt students of color, but they hurt lots of students. They hurt white students too. And I think universities, for a long time, we felt that we needed to keep people out, or we needed to make it harder for folks to get in. And it ended up making it harder for people of color. But if we can, I don't know, I don't quite understand that attitude or where that came from, but I don't know if that helps at all. Okay.
In many of these cases, that falls to white people who are racist. And that puts people on the defensive in discussion, in meaningful discussion. I mean, do you think that's the case? And what could be done to help solve that problem of the implication? I mean, is it the media that carries it on? Is it all of us? That needs to be changed, in my opinion, to start bridging some of these problems.
Well, and I think, and I get where you're coming from with that, and I think that if we talk about the structures, that's not a human being. Now, humans came up with some of these policies and practices, but if we talk about, here is a practice that is racist, and how do we know it's racist? Because of the way it's impacting people of color. Here's a practice that is sexist, right? And here's how we know it's sexist, because this is how it impacts women. Here is a practice that is heterosexist. How do we know that? So that's not saying, here you white man, you straight white man, how dare you, right? This is the practice, right? So if we can take it away from the person, and to put it on the practice or the policy, the guideline, hopefully that will work. That can help keep people in the conversation. The CDO can help you identify the structures and the policies and talk about those things that will make it better. And so if you're opposed to it, you need to understand that it is true. I'm not making this up. What works for people of color works better for white people. If you want to be more successful, help people of color be more successful. Learn what works for them. It will work better for you. If you're a man and you want to be more successful, help a woman be more successful. You will be more successful too. So there's that. But I love to tell the story of one of our students when I was at the University of Utah. She's Korean American and she was a med student. She had an undergraduate degree from the University of Utah in linguistics and women's studies, and she got to be on a research team in the School of Med. And they kept finding they couldn't understand. They were looking at women patients and male patients as they were being discharged from the hospital, and the males were going home and they were fine. The women were going home and they were worse than when they were in the hospital. And they couldn't understand what's going on. So these are all men, and here's this woman. She's the only woman on the team. And she said, she's a woman. She's going home, and she's the caretaker. The same thing that she did before she got to the hospital, when she goes home, she's going home to do that again. She's taking care of the husband, she's taking care of the kids, she's cooking the meals. That's why she's still sick. That perspective, the fact that this is what diversity does for you, it brings in a perspective that you don't have, right? I used to study group decision making. And when we first started studying, and I'll date myself, but I won't give you a year. When we first started studying, the only people we studied were white men. Then they introduced women. They were white women. And oh my goodness, the decisions got to be a little bit better, a little bit different, because they had different points of view coming in. Then they brought in people of color. Oh my goodness, look at those decisions. Oh my, this is what diversity does. It doesn't hurt you. It helps you make better decisions. It helps us have better health outcomes. Just diversity is great, right? So, and then if someone else who's, I might also argue what I talked about in my talk, and that is, look, there are companies that are hiring and they are not hiring whole academic units because they get that they need folks who know how to work across difference. And if you're not producing those people, they're going to go where they can find them. So why wouldn't you want to do that? Why wouldn't you want your students to be the best candidate for a position? I think that, again, I think there are a couple of things. One is to make sure that that message is everywhere, that this value of diversity. So if I go to your website, on your front page, what am I going to see that says, oh, this is the value of this campus? What do our materials say about the importance of diversity? But then how is it rewarded? Right? So when we do these annual, every year I'm sure you have these award ceremonies where you recognize students and staff and faculty who are doing great things. How are you recognizing folks who are doing the work of diversity? Are you? So it was just drawn to our attention that on our campus we have 2 diversity awards for, and they're relatively new. I want to say they're about 5 or 6 years old maybe, for research and teaching. They are one-time monetary, and they don't always have to be monetary either, but these are, because the others that also are awarded at that time are monetary too. They're $5,000 and base salary increase. So, yeah.
Wow.
So, right, yeah. So I think that'll probably change, but again, that wasn't intentional, right? They said, oh, let's do this award. Okay, that's a great idea. What should it be? Oh, let's do $3,000. Okay, that's good. That was at the end of the conversation, right? And so somebody else said, just this year, somebody said, well, did you know that the other awards are $5,000 and their base salary as opposed to one time? So I think rewards, but I think we will have come a long way when universities really do hold deans and department chairs accountable. When, as a part of your annual evaluation, you've got to talk about what did you do. Listen, I did this work at Utah, okay? And if you can do it at Utah, you can do it. I had the dean of the College of Science called me and he said, I know I've got a department that is trying real hard not to hire women. So I'm not gonna let them hire anybody. Can I get your okay on that? I said, yes, you can, right? I had another dean in the College of Business, so he copied me on an email. I love that man. He sent an email to all his department chairs and he said, where are the faculty of color? Why am I the only one who seems to know any? Get to it. That's what I mean by courageous leadership. And you know what? They did. They did. My phone was ringing off the hook. I had job security.
Right, we all have our biases, but I think it helps in actually talking about what those biases are. And when we make those real,
Yes.
Then we can see that I'm not attacking you because you said what you said. Mm-hmm. You said what you said out of naivete or, just habit or pattern, socialization, those kinds of things. And, I come from, my ethnic background is Armenian. My grandparents are survivors of the genocide. My parents went through a lot of discrimination and prejudice in Fresno. I haven't experienced that. I've been privileged not to have gone through that personally. But I reveal my own mistakes, and I think that helps to bridge the defensiveness. Does that?
No, I think that's right. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think, as Alma said, that we've all made mistakes and we all have biases. We're all trying to get somewhere better, and that's right. But I also think it's trying to have that conversation without without passing judgment. You're not a bad person, right? In fact, if you didn't have some of these biases, you would be a miracle, right? And how could you not? But now, what do we do with that? How do we take that and make it work, right? And move? And so I'm not going to stay there. That's out there. It's on the table. Okay, now what?
I think that allowing ourselves to become vulnerable in a situation like that is very, very important. My story was about my bias, and I'm in a room full of Air Force Academy faculty, all of whom were military. And when I put that bias on, this guy was like this the whole time. We've been talking for 2 hours. It was a full day session. As soon as I put it on the table, his whole demeanor changed. He engaged in the conversation because all the time I had never even used the word racist. But as soon as I said it and I said, here's my bias and here's what it could have cost somebody in a job, an African-American woman, it made the whole thing different. So we have to be able to be honest with each other, I would argue, that to say what you said. Here's my background, but I've been privileged. I know that. But let's put it on.
The coming together, to sit together at the table. And so much of what we've accomplished around diversity and inclusion throughout the country has been in partnership with white males. So white males can really be a tremendous diversity partner, and in fact, we would not be where we are in many of our situations without that partnership. And I think what the coming together is about is to, for me, racism has some element of power. So I know the comments that Sterling, the owner, or well, now band owner of the Clippers said was egregious, but to me it's more like, why weren't people upset when his racism and prejudice ended up with Latinos and African American people being evicted out of their homes because he preferred Asians to be in there versus that other population. So, to me, like, we were kind of upset about the wrong things. But in that instance, because he had the power to deny or grant someone a basic right of where to live, to me, he is a racist in that sense. What he says and all of that, it's egregious. But I think a lot of us are not racist because we're not in that power position, but we probably benefit from those who have the power and are denying access to others. So if I don't want that kind of a privilege being extended to me, and I'm a white male, then what I can do is be a great diversity partner. And again, we wouldn't have a lot of the progress that we've got without white males standing up and being courageous and being part of wanting to have a society that truly lives up to its values.